oh, everybody must work 5 or 6 days a week or 7 days a week. And what's the history of, how do we get to this? Is it always been this way?
Yeah, and I think that's such an important question to start with, because if we can understand how we got to where we're at, then it can tell us, is it easy to deconstruct this, or is it really solid what we're experiencing? And so to understand where we're at now, we have to go back several thousand years to the Babylonians. So the Babylonians made up the 7-day week. There's nothing in nature that points to a 7-day week. A year makes sense. That's how long it takes us to go around the sun.
Right.
A day makes sense, how long we spin. Months loosely line up with the lunar cycle. But when the Babylonians looked up into the sky, they saw the sun and the moon, they saw the earth on their feet, they saw Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. So they saw 7 major things in the sky. So they made a 7-day week, completely made up. The Romans had a 10-day week. The Egyptians had an 8-day week. And so let's just start with this thing that we think is super normal. The 7-day week is completely just made up by the power brokers of Babylon thousands of years ago.
So it's arbitrary.
Right? Totally arbitrary. So
Oh
fast forward to the late 1800s, early 1900s, the average person was working 10 to 14 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. They had a farmer's schedule, even if they weren't working on the farm. So in 1926, when Henry Ford said, I'm going to do the 40-hour work week, that was a huge step forward for humanity, for business, for productivity, for people just having time outside of work. And so the reason, though, that Henry Ford did that is he wanted to sell more cars to his own people, because his belief was that people weren't going to buy a car to just get to work faster, but if they had a weekend where they got to go see friends and family and go recreate, he sold a ton of cars to his own people. And so we see the industrialist mindset just take over the 20th century. That idea that people are machines, that we can plug them in, we can set it and forget it. We see this in business. We see it in schools. We see it across the board. But then in the 80s and 90s, we start to see that start to fall apart, that Fridays really start to move over to being closer to being a weekend and a less productive day. We see the rise of casual Fridays. We see that it's when people are bringing in cupcakes to the office and hosting baby showers there. We do cheesy team building activities where we're supposed to do a trust fall into the arms of our coworkers. These days are not productive compared to, say, a Monday or Tuesday. And so we see then the pandemic of 2020 and 2021 hit, where all these things that we thought were the rules of the world, globally we experiment to see they absolutely are not. It all falls apart. We work differently. We commute differently. We see that the work key performance indicators of butts in the chair for 40 hours are terrible KPIs for business, that's not a good indicator. So now as people start to go back to work, they're realizing that they work for industrialists, that they work for people that just see them as machines. So we see this great resignation happening right now because people want to do better work. They want more creative and flexible work, but those industrialist minded supervisors aren't bending to this new way of thinking. So we have this new evolutionary model that's been emerging over the last 20 years, really start to emerge post-pandemic. And that's where businesses are doing experiments and testing with time and with flexibility and agileness. And we see major corporations like Kickstarter doing a 4-day work week. We see countries like Iceland doing 4-day work weeks and seeing massive productivity, massive creativity. And there's so many other case examples of showing that this new evolutionary model actually is going to be better for humanity and productivity.
Wow, that is so many just bombshells right there. I mean, from the 7-day work week actually goes back to Babylon. That's mind-boggling, and it's all arbitrary. And I'm a Roman history buff myself, and I knew they had the 10-day, and I thought that was the weird thing. But now I'm realizing really it's all arbitrary. So
it's all weird.
Yeah. Now you mentioned you mentioned two things that sometimes seem opposing, but and that is productivity and creativity. So how does, in your view and in your experience, how does this affect productivity and creativity if we're going to do the 4-day work week?
Yeah, what we're seeing is that the old flow of the industrialists isn't working. So the way books used to be written is, here's the 5 steps to be more productive. And it's a blueprint. you're either in or you're out. Or we have other books on the other side that are these woo-woo books that say, you know, create a vision board, manifest it to the universe, and you're going to get a trip to Hawaii without working. They each have some truth to them, but this new method that's emerging is that we first start internally with our internal inclinations. Because if we start with productivity and our inside is being ego-driven or all sorts of other things, we're not going to do the best work that we could do. So we start internally. Then we move into slowing down, which we intuitively know is when our best ideas come. You know, when you're taking a shower, when you're out for a hike, when you're doing a drive without the music on, that's when you have these great ideas. And so we see that when the brain rests, when it's not feeling like it's as stressed out, it can actually start to get more creative, which then when we move into creating less time for ourselves, when it's time to go from slowing down to absolutely killing it, we can be explosive within the jobs that we do because we then have the extra energy, we have the extra time. And what we're doing is we're dropping the ball intentionally on the things that we shouldn't be doing. So if you take a 40+ hour work week and say, I'm going to even shave off 8 hours and do 32, are you going to see a 20% drop in your productivity? Not at all, because you're going to start working on the 32 hours of best work. You're not going to do the things that you shouldn't be doing, like taking out the trash or vacuuming your office or, you know, learning coding when you're not a coder. All these things that entrepreneurs are trying all the time to do. I need to wear multiple hats. I need to hustle. I've worked every Saturday since I was 14. That just means you're bad at learning things in business and outsourcing. Like, that's not a badge to wear. That shows me that you're stupid at business. Like, so rein it in. And then if week after week, you're using your very best energy into your very best work, and then heavily relaxing and prepping for that next week. Instead of being reactionary on the weekends to this stressful week we just had, we're now optimizing our brains looking forward in a different way.
Okay, awesome. So Joe, could you, is this something, I guess have you coached people through this process yourself? And maybe you could share if it's relevant, you know, a typical, maybe a story or two from someone, you know, going from, because I know so many of us, you know, are doing, I mean, we're almost like 50 hours is not even enough. You know, it's like, oh, I've got to be doing at least 60. And, you know, if I'm doing 70, then I really get the badge of honor, you know? And, you know, so I don't know, could you maybe share any transformation stories that you might have?
Yeah, one of my favorite stories that I also talk about in the book is Dr. Jerry, who he owns a counseling practice in Orange County, and a mega practice, super successful, highly sought after speaker. I want to say that when I first met him, he was probably charging $400 per session to meet with him. And on the first pre-consulting call, I always do calls ahead of time to see if we're a fit. His wife was on the call, which I always love when someone's important person is on the call as well, because I can get some other information. And at the end of it, I said to her, is there anything else I should know about Jerry before we enter into this relationship? And she said, if Jerry doesn't get help, he's going to have a heart attack. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, he is working all the time. You know, he helps get the kids off to school. He's working when the kids are in bed. He's checking emails. Everything goes through Jerry, and he's going to have a heart attack. So he signed up for consulting with me. And between the time of our pre-consulting call and our first consulting call, he had a heart attack. So he had to delay his first session. He was in the hospital, came back out, which was a wake-up call for him that his wife just, you know, a week earlier had said, Joe, he's going to have a heart attack if he doesn't slow down. Wow. So the first question that I had to him was, what's one thing that if you started doing that one thing would just light you up on the inside? And he knew right away. I mean, I didn't have to dig in at all. He said, if I could go snowboarding once a week, that would be amazing. And so he lived in Orange County, you know, about an hour drive to get up into the hills, into the mountains to go snowboarding. And so we set that really as the anchor of every Wednesday, he was going to go snowboarding. But what was great about it is, to do that, Jerry had to let go of all sorts of things within his business. And so his assistant then had to look at all the intakes. So because he was the psychologist, he's the owner, every single intake that came in, he was evaluating, deciding who it went to. He had not systematized his own brain to do that. So we had to figure that out. We had to say, for you as the owner, what kind of things do you want to know and to be a part of. And he said, if someone comes in and they just were in the hospital for suicidal ideation, he's like, I feel an ethical responsibility to talk to those people. Okay, great. We need to have a dashboard of when you're going to do that. So Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday mornings, there was a 10-minute window where he would do quick phone calls to just assess those people. Also, he knew he needed a dashboard of all the big picture things that he in the past had in his head.
Right.
And so then he had this assistant that every morning they had a stand-up meeting, quick meeting to talk. Here's where we're at. Here's where these clinicians are at. Here's where our numbers are at. Here's where the billing's at. He figured out the dashboard he needed to know that he could move into the day. And then we almost doubled his counseling rate to make it so that people didn't want to see him anymore. By doubling his counseling rate, it then meant that the other therapists should raise their rates as well. Because it looks super weird when one person's like $600 an hour and other people are $125.
Right.
And so then he's making more money as a business, but he's the elite one to go to. So it forced these systems to be created because he had to go snowboarding on Wednesdays. And so when we do those little things where we say, I'm going to take an extra day off each week, and your team goes, how are we going to do that? You know this and this and this. Your team then can help direct all those things. You don't have to create the systems. You can say, okay, here's the outcome that I want. I want to know where we're at with the finances. I want to know where we're at with the clients, whatever the KPIs are for your business. You create the system that you are going to enact. Tell me how you're going to report out. Tell me what I need to do to help support you in that. Then your whole team creates these systems rather than you feeling like you have this big burden to do it.
Wow, it's an amazing story, and that was a psychologist who was a highly respected guy who obviously knows a lot of these concepts, but it's so easy not to apply them to ourselves, I guess. And so hats off to you, Joe, for I mean, you may have probably saved the guy's life,
Yeah, as far as I know, he hasn't had another heart attack, so that's good.
Yeah, and he's probably a lot happier. That midweek break is, probably reducing his cortisol and giving him good shot of dopamine and serotonin. And
well, and one other thing that I didn't say in there also is we set some hard and soft boundaries. And so I think that's an important thing to note, is that we set some hard boundaries of when email stops each day. That when you're home and your kids want to be there for you and to have a relationship with you, and even when they're in bed, you're not emailing, that you need to allow your brain to bounce back. And so when he saw that he could still have a very successful business without him being that linchpin that kept everything together, he was able to step back because he had the data to support it. So we had that hard boundary. And then we set some very soft boundaries where it was aspirational boundaries of what we wanted to do as well.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating. So Joe, in doing a little research, I also noticed that well, you of course did your research, and there's actually hard science, psychological research behind some of the principles of the 4-day work week. And is that something you could maybe tell us a little bit about?
Yeah. So there's a number of different things that we looked at in the research as I put together the book. Hold on just a second. Got so excited there. Had to have a drink of water.
Awesome. We got to stay hydrated.
I know. I sure do during these interviews. So first I looked at the research around internally. What do top performers do to be successful and to set themselves up internally? So we looked at the 3 internal inclinations that people most have that are successful. So we walked through all the research on those 3. And then we look at the slowing down research and the 4-day work week in regards to what we see happening in society. And so for me, one of the best applications of this research is actually Kalamazoo Valley Community College. And what I love about KVCC is that it's an unexpected kind of new player in regards to the 4-day work week. This is a community college in Southwest Michigan in Kalamazoo. And this instructor, Ted Forrester, who was teaching and learning heating and cooling systems, so HVAC systems at this college, typical blue collar guy, starts to notice just how much the college is spending on air conditioning costs on Fridays in the summertime. And he, every Friday, goes up onto the roof and takes a picture of the empty parking lot where there's hardly any students on campus. And in the fall, he presents this to the board and says, hey, there's nobody here on Fridays, and we're paying all this money to air condition these empty buildings. So he makes the case for the 4-day work week in the summer. And about 5 years ago, they switch over to the 4-day work week throughout the whole summer. the HR department, quote, donates the extra hours. So people work a 36-hour week over 4 days, and then the extra 4 hours are just gifted to the staff. But what they found is beyond just the AC costs, their retention is stronger with their employees, because Michigan, it feels like it snows for 10 months of the year. And so when summer finally comes, people want to be outside. They want to do things. They
Oh,
want to
yeah.
enjoy it. And so who's going to give up a 4-day work week when you're in a job you really like? And so that's a competitive advantage now for KVCC. Student success has gone up because these people are doing more of a flexible schedule. If they know that their kid has a baseball game at 4, they can come in earlier, work through lunch, or be able to have the office hours expand to where students want to actually be there. Evening hours is something that a lot of those students want. And so student success has gone up. And then you look at health outcomes, that's improved as well, because people then have time on Fridays to do that extra work they need to do at home, or to prep for the weekend, or even make plans to really enjoy their lives. And so we see places like KVCC that have innovated, that are supporting that research that we see over and over being reiterated within the research community.
Wow, that's really, really fascinating. And do you know of any other universities or community colleges that are going in that direction?
Yeah, so Microsoft Japan did an experiment around it. Kickstarter in 2022 is doing it. A number of countries, Spain, Portugal, Iceland, New Zealand, are testing it out and creating different ways that they're testing it. Because pre-pandemic, this was a big thing that people really wouldn't talk about. The 4-day work week was not something that, in the same way that, if we wanted to do a Zoom meeting, people would say, oh, let's just meet in person, and we'd waste all this time. When we switched and really saw the opportunity because of the pandemic, a lot of things have shifted quickly. And so we're clearly out of the industrialist era, but we're in that messy middle where the experiments, the application, the one size fits all isn't going to be there. So over the coming 5 to 10 years, we've got a window of opportunity to really try some unique ways to work. And so I think that emerging research is really going to continue to show just the power of that 4-day work week.
Yeah, fascinating. Fascinating. So we've talked about doing the, cutting the hours, doing the less time at work and getting more done. And you mentioned with the story of your client's transformation, that he was able to increase his rates and both himself and his team. How else could one increase? Are there any other stories about increasing income? Because I know a lot of people would be afraid. Oh, if I work less, I'm not going to be able to make my mortgage payments, or my car payments, my credit card payments, or pay for my kids' school or whatever. Could you maybe speak to the income portion a little more?
Yeah, so I think if someone working less means that they're making less money, that means that even if they own a business,
Right.
they still gave themselves a job.
Yeah.
So if when your kids are sick, you don't make money, that's a problem. So
Yeah.
let's just start with that. You need to shift your business model if you being present is what always brings in the money.
Okay.
And so
Good point.
typically what that looks like is you're first going from one-on-one work to then one to a few, then one to many. So
Right.
I'm trained as a mental health counselor and psychologist. So much of my work was someone comes in for a 45-minute session, and then I get paid X number of dollars for that 45-minute session. If I go on vacation for a week, that's 20 people that aren't paying that hourly in a week, or 30. That's a big chunk of change in addition
Right.
to the cost of a vacation. And so I've given myself in that situation a job.
Yes.
And so having additional people that work for you, so 1099s or W-2s. So in my case, when I had my practice, that was extra counselors. Within my consulting business, that's having extra consultants. But even going from one-on-one to one to a few to one to many is such an important shift, to go from more me to we might say.
Yes.
So what that looked like for me was I had my individual counseling. At the time, it was, I think, $150 a session. I wanted to have consulting clients that were double that. So $300 per the same amount of time for my consulting at this period of time back in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next year, I added mastermind groups, so small groups of 6 to 8. Each person was paying around $500 a month, and we had 2 mastermind sessions and then a conference that everyone came to collectively, and they paid their own travel and all of that. So now I've gone from just $300 an hour to now having 6 people giving me $500 for the month, and we're meeting just for 2 hours. So I've significantly increased my monthly income from doing that. So then the one to many is then I started a membership community. So I'm looking at okay, these people that can't afford $500 a month, what can they afford? They can afford $99 a month. And so we have this membership community now of 300 plus people that are paying $100 a month. And we have
Okay.
different offerings within that. So then continuing to level up and open up ways to grow, we have membership communities now that other people that I've hired, they run those. So we have group practice launch, group practice boss, we've got podcast launch school. So finding these multiple streams of income, but all based on talking to the current clients and current audience and saying, what type of product do you want us to launch next? So that almost every time we have a solid sold out launch.
Oh, great. That makes so much sense. So for practitioners out there thinking about one-to-one, one to a few, one to many, and then bringing in other professionals that can help with that. It makes perfect sense. And this fits, and this allows. So you yourself, I guess, are you able to do always do the 4-day work week? Is that part of your own plan, or how does that work?
Yeah. So even throughout this media blitz, where I've done over 200 media appearances, I've still maintained a Monday through Thursday schedule, 9 a.m. to 3:45 p.m. when I go pick up my daughters from school. So outside of this schedule, I'm usually working Tuesday and Wednesday, the first and third weeks of the month, and then filling in some in between. So usually 5 to 6 days a month is where I'm at right now personally, but that's a harder book to sell.
Yeah. Wow. Good for you. Good for you. So, Joe, I'm just looking at my notes here, and I've got just a couple other things, and then I want to wrap up and maybe get a summary here, because I like to try to keep these short, and there's so much. And I think I did want to mention your book, from what I understand, just came out the October 5th. Is that right?
Yeah. October 5th, Thursday is the new Friday, came out.
Okay, amazing. So that's easy to find on Amazon and other places, I imagine. And so what I wanted to ask, though, this is just looking at the book quickly. I noticed that you talk about customization, because I think that's another fear people might have is, oh, this is going to be a cookie cutter plan that doesn't fit my life, and my life is so different. And can you talk to us about any stories about how people might customize this to make it work for them?
Yeah. So when we look at this model, it's definitely more of a menu than that prescription model. So saying, here are some things that we know the research supports. Let's try some of these things. And so oftentimes we want to start with just the productivity, but I would say doing some experiments around slowing down. So I remember I host this event called Slow Down School every summer outside of COVID, and people fly into Northern Michigan. We pick them up in a big yellow school bus, take them to Lake Michigan, stay right on the water. There's a river that runs through the campus. We have an executive chef that has partnerships with
Awesome.
local farmers, massage therapists come in to give massages. We have a yoga teacher come in, and we hang out on the beach and skip stones for the first couple of days and go hiking. So we genuinely slow down for 2 days. And then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday morning, we run full tilt towards their businesses. And I teach them about sprint types and ways to sprint, and how to prep their brains to go into a sprint. And so they experience these 20-minute sprints over and over kind of throughout those days. And seeing what's been done in just one 20-minute sprint. One lady was stuck on her consulting business, and she named the consulting business, bought the URL, and sketched out her first 9 emails for her email opt-in series. In 20 minutes. This other guy, he had been stuck on writing a book about couples therapy. He's just this great couples therapist in Chicago. And Michael Glavin just was really stuck in this area of writing his book. In one sprint, he sketched out, I think it was 7 or 9 chapters of his book with like 3 to 5 bullet points under every single chapter. It just flowed out of him. And so when we have this neurosyncing with our brain, where we're able to actually pair what it needs to relax, like we did the first 2 days, and then we have this pent up excitement towards our work, we run so much faster within that work. And so even small things like setting up your environment can trigger flow state so much faster than if you just jump into work in random places. So in the book, I write about writing the book and why I was able to write it just 1 day a week. So I worked on it every single Thursday. I would wake up on Thursday mornings. I would protect my brain from being able to have anything coming into it. So I didn't look at news, didn't look at text, didn't look at emails, then had a healthy breakfast, had my green tea and my coffee, all set for the morning, had my green smoothie there also. So I'm ready for the day. I would enter into my office and change the lighting. So I had writing lighting. I would move my chair from the corner that it's in, on this video to a different spot in the room that was my writing spot.
Okay.
As well, I would put on my Bose noise canceling headphones that I only wore to write at that time. Now I use them for other things, and had one specific playlist that I played when I was writing. So I'm triggering my brain to create an environment for writing. So I could right away drop into flow state, because I always would end each Thursday with whiteboarding out the next week's chapter. So what are the main 5 to 7 points of the chapter? What's the main research? What are the main stories, case studies? What are the main points and takeaways and activities? And what are my questions that I have about each of those? So the research said this, what does that actually mean? And so I just let it simmer for a week in my subconscious. So then when I came back, I'm diving right back in where I can look at this and say, oh, I've been thinking about this study. I'm wondering, where did curiosity kill the cat come from? Well, just to tell you, it came from a Washington Post headline about a cat that got stuck in a chimney in the early 1900s.
Oh, wow.
So these things that it's like, they just popped into my brain throughout the week. So then you can dive into that flow state faster. So having different environments to trigger different types of work can substantially change the way that you jump into a flow state.
Yeah. Wow. Really fascinating stuff. And I know from habit research that I've done, because habits is one of my big topics, is that it's easier to program our environment one time than it is to try to use willpower to avoid those cookies or those donuts or that the bad news that's on mainstream news or things like that. So I was excited to hear what you said about protecting your brain from influences.
Well, we do what we see. Our brains are still pretty primitive. And so, if it's 9:30 at night and I'm having a glass of wine and watching Netflix and I go over and say, I'm a little bit hungry, and I open up, the snack cabinet, if Doritos and Pringles are at the front, I'm going to eat Doritos and Pringles.
Sure.
But if those are something that I want to have for a barbecue on the weekend, I push it to the back and put all the pistachios and the mixed nuts up front and the sunflower seeds. It's going to be like, okay, I'll eat the pistachios. We do what we see. And so if we can set up that environment, exactly what you're saying, to have us succeed both in business and life, it just makes our brains better able to make good decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of that, and this is related to that, I know that you also talk about, discarding the unnecessary parts of work and parts of maybe of our day, because we all can, even with, since so many of us are working at home, it's so easy to fall into, productive procrastination, like, oh, I just had a bite to eat. I might as well go ahead and clean up the kitchen, and when I really need to be preparing for my interview with Joe. And this actually happened to me today. I made a note of it. I said, I'm going to mention that. But what are some ways, is there anything, could you talk to us about discarding, the unnecessary task so that we can actually do what's most important to move the needle?
Yeah. Well, what you just said about cleaning up the kitchen, that's a perfect example of we do what we see. And so you're reacting to your environment instead of saying, what do I want out of my work day? And so my core belief is that every minute that I waste when I should be working, I'm stealing from my girls, I'm stealing from my friends, I'm stealing from me as just an individual when I could be meditating at the end of the day. So I don't want to dink around at all when it's work time. Mm-hmm. So even just saying in my calendar, okay, how much prep time do I need before and after an interview? When am I going to eat? When am I going to do anything? I never have a to-do list. I have a schedule. And so I look at my schedule and I do what I see. And so making sure that we say, okay, I have an interview. Maybe I need to just automatically add 5 or 10 minutes beforehand to feel prepped to go into that interview, to check my sound, to make sure all those things are in our calendars ahead of time. So when my assistant schedules something, I'll tell her whether I want to be back to back or whether I want a buffer between them. And so she's making sure that my schedule is full to the brim. Or she may notice, a bunch of emails that I need to address, and she'll put that in the calendar, check these emails. So I'm searching for those particular emails within my email, rather than just, getting lost in there and then get sucked into things that I shouldn't. And so whether it's having an assistant or you doing it yourself, making sure that you are saying every minute of your workday, what are you doing? And if you don't need all those minutes, you can choose to take a break in the middle of the day and clean the kitchen. There's nothing wrong with that, but we want
Right.
it to be an intentional decision rather than a
Intentional, right.
reactionary.
Yeah, not a procrastination thing that we don't want to avoid something else, perhaps. So, wow, that makes so much sense. And Joe, something you circling back to the case study you told us about before, you had mentioned that early on that you had suggested to your client that I think you called it the light up question. You know, you'd asked him what would be something that would really light you up if you could do it. And could you give us some more examples of those, number one? And then number two, is there science research behind that too that shows that, or is that something that you've developed with your own experience?
Yeah. So I think, if we even just think about what's something super small that we can do, we can add something to our weekend and remove something from our weekend. We can think about those things that light us up in our personal lives in a different type of way. And so examples of those are, every Wednesday I do improv. And so on Wednesdays when I do improv, I laugh harder. Like, I don't need to do an ab workout the next day. My abs hurt from laughing so hard. So that's something I've added to my week. Oftentimes we think that we have to know exactly what we like right from the get-go.
Right.
Just like little kids, they might try soccer and they hate it. They might try art and they love it. They might try music and they're in the middle. We as adults can do the same thing, but we forget that we don't have to just be stuck in the activities that we've chosen to do. And so taking that experimental model that pushes back on how the industrialists taught us and saying, I'm going to try some new things to see what lights me up. I'm going to try taking 2 hours this weekend to read a book that's been on my nightstand forever. I'm going to make a coffee date with a friend of mine. I'm going to remove, maybe there's that friend that's just toxic, and every time that you talk to them, you feel like trash, and you're just like, I don't want to talk to that toxic friend. You are allowed to remove that from your life. And so if you have this experimental model, this evolutionary model, over time, you're going to find the things that light you up. Like for you, it might be a 20-mile run. For me, that's a new level of hell. So like being able to figure
same for me.
Yeah, but I mean, I have a neighbor who he's training for a marathon and he loves it. I would hate that. But I love stand-up paddleboarding. I love being in nature. I love hanging out with friends, listening to good music. So finding those things for yourself that light you up and putting them into your calendar then makes you more likely to show up for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love what you mentioned, or the phrase before. You mentioned schedule, not the to-do list, because what gets scheduled gets done, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we have it in our schedule, we're going to actually do it. I say if you put something in your schedule, show up for that, even if it's for yourself. And so if you had some consulting client that's paying you a bunch of money, you wouldn't no show on them. But by you putting something in your schedule, you're saying, I am allocating time to do this instead of other things. And you could be cleaning your kitchen. So if you don't use that hour to really focus in on your business, you're stealing an hour that you could have a cleaner kitchen. You're stealing an hour when you could be volunteering with your kids' school. That's an hour that you could have been meditating and feeling like a better person. And so if every minute that we work, we say this minute has to count, it creates a sense of urgency where we actually do the best work that we can do.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. In fact, the term, I'm sure there's so many of these productivity things, but I think it's called Pomodoro, the 25-minute timer thing. So does that relate to you had mentioned the 20-minute sprints? Is that related?
Yeah, so that definitely was kind of who kind of broke that idea of sprinting. What's interesting is that the University of Illinois found that if every 20 minutes you just take a 1-minute break, that it completely eliminates vigilance decrement. So vigilance, how well you pay attention to something, decrement meaning breaking down over time. And so it completely eliminates that. And so when we actually learn our sprint type, similar to a personality type, then we can say, here's the variety of the types of sprints that I can have. So we've often heard about okay, we've got this 20-minute sprint, you do this batching. But some people, are not going to react to that. So that type of person's the time block sprinter. The other type of sprinter are task switch sprinters. And there are people that need that variety. So yeah, it's still 20 to 30-minute chunks, but it's variety within it. And then the other side of sprinting that we want to look at is when you're sprinting. And so an automated sprinter is someone who is going to have it be the same time every week. So every Thursday I was writing the book. And then the other type is an intensive sprinter. So these are people that need to go away to an Airbnb or go, to a friend's house or something to get away from their environment for, say, 3 days to really work on some different things. So when you discover your sprint type similar to your personality type, it allows you then to get more done within your natural personality.
That's fascinating. Guys, I really think we could do 2 hours here, Joe. You mentioned, but you keep giving me new ideas for questions. And the personality, one personality test that a lot of people are familiar with. There's so many of them. Myers-Briggs. There's, I think one recently that I did was the Colby test. What would you suggest if someone asked you what do you normally, have people do?
Yeah, I personally would really like the Enneagram. I think that the Enneagram, because it has so much history behind it, is a really good one. One part I really like about the Enneagram is knowing where you naturally go when you're in health, and also when you're not in health, and to know. Okay. So I'm an Enneagram 3, and I believe when I'm not in health, I end up going more to a like people pleaser worker. Like I just put my nose to the grindstone and work harder. So that's not healthy for. So when I notice I'm doing that, I can step back and say, wait a second, I'm not in health right now because I'm just putting my nose to the grindstone, working harder than I should. I need to step back and say, like, I am not being healthy within this. And so for me, I really like the Enneagram. There was a whole series in the Faith and Practice podcast that was all about the Enneagram that really walks through each of the types. That they just do a great job.
Andrew, fantastic. Wow. Well, Joe, our time is just about up, and I know you've got a bunch of other interviews, so I want to be respectful for your time as well. And I did also want to mention to our listeners and our viewers out there that you have a mastermind group, and you've made a special you've got a special offer for people that are listening or watching this video today. And I think it is why don't you just tell us about your mastermind group? And I think it's 10 books. It's free admission. Is that? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this is a mastermind group that's usually over $500 to be a part of. But the Thursday is the New Friday mastermind group. You just buy 10 books wherever you buy your books and just submit your receipt over at thursdayisthenewfriday.com. And so within this mastermind group, the first third of it is going to be me going deeper beyond the book, knowing that most people will have read the book, to kind of dig in beyond just what the research shows and beyond what we say in the book. The next third is going to be some hot seats for people to practically implement Thursday is the New Friday. So there's going to be lots of podcasters, influencers, individual entrepreneurs, but then also people that own businesses or in a typical kind of 40-hour a week type of job. And so how do you apply this there? What are some experiments that people can do? How do they think through the different types of businesses? Because we know it's not one size fits all. And then the last third, and I would actually argue is probably the most important third, is going to be a really strong networking connection, where my goal is that by the end of the 6 times that we meet, that you have 6 to 10 new friends, colleagues, people that you want to network, do joint ventures, do podcasts, come up with something. Because to me, when I really look at my trajectory professionally, it's been having other people that were beyond where I'm at pull me along, and being able to have those people to collaborate with, to me, is the most important outcome of any sort of mastermind group. So we're seeing a lot of top influencers getting their 10 books. Then you just submit it over at thursdayisthenewfriday.com. And then we'll have you in the group starting that first Thursday in November at noon Eastern.
Wow, that's an amazing offer. So so thursdayisthenewfriday.com. That would be probably would that be the best way for anyone who wants to just jump to find out more about what you're doing? They can follow you right there.
Yep, that's the best spot. That's going to bring you to the page on joesanok.com that has all the information about the book. And then you'll see at the top the menu of all the other things, such as experiments, where you can submit your experiments. You can take the internal inclination quiz there as well. And then there's all sorts of different blog posts on there about the 4-day work week.
Wow, this is Joe. This has been one of the most fun, but also most I think educational and productive interviews that I've had in a long time. And so I want to thank you again for your time and for bringing your energy, bringing all your wisdom and good cheer. And definitely we'll get this, hope to stay in touch, and we'll get this interview up before the end of this month.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Okay,
Boom.
that's it. Well, I think that
covered some ground.
That was